Okay, this video is going to cover some visibility settings that we maybe have touched on in previous demos, but today we'll just kind of look at them a little bit more in depth. And then I'm going to show you two different ways that you can create a site or a topography. One being just creating one manually yourself. But then another way I kind of want to look at it is how we can take exports from either DWG files that we maybe get from surveyors or even ones that we do from exports through like Google Maps or through websites like CAD Mapper. Because thanks to Google Maps, we have 3D topography kind of available digitally that's fairly accurate for almost the entire world. And that's pretty wonderful, and it can really help expedite the process of creating an accurate site for a building. Then we'll also look at how to create some subregions within a site or a surface and add different site components, which is just almost basically the Revit term for trees, but we can add other things to sites as well. And then we'll stop today with creating a mass, and I'll even show some ways where massing can help at the very beginning of a project when you're still like in the ideation stage and you're not quite sure what you want to do. Or if you know that you want to do something that's a little funky, that's just not going to lend itself well to the traditional wall, door, roof tools that we have kind of up here. So what I have behind here are two versions of the Cardinal. In this one here, I created a mass, or rather created my site manually. So we can see if I look at it from the side that I just have kind of a flat area here that slowly slopes upward. I created this site myself. So it's not really based off of any actual place. And I put in like a little bit of pavement right here. Then I also have another version of the same house or the same building, but this site was actually created from an export from the internet. So I was able to download the 3D topography of a piece of land, and then I exported it to an AutoCAD file, and then I was able to put that in Revit and be able to just make it into my site as well. So I can get a pretty detailed and pretty accurate site without putting in a heck of a lot of effort. However, this can also work, particularly for this project here. We can do it either way since we don't have a site necessarily for either of these buildings. What I'm going to do first, though, is just close out of both of these and not save my changes at all. And then I'll open up the file from where we left off last time. So here I just have my building with my floors and my roof. For visibility settings, one thing I talked about before, but I'll mention it again, is in my 3D view here. So if you click up here, it'll bring you to 3D. If you're not in there already, is we have this section box. So if you scroll down in your properties bar for your 3D view, you can turn that either on or off. I just kind of like having it turned on when I'm in a 3D view because it'll help me kind of cut parts out of the view that I don't necessarily want. And then we also have the ability to hide things in our view. I've shown how to hide things here with this temporary hide and isolate. So for instance, I could just click on this spot elevation here and I could say, just hide the element, would just hide this one here for the roof. Versus if I click on another one of these and I come back to the glasses and I say hide category, that would hide everything associated with it. The opposite of that is the isolate tool. And so if I click on this window, for instance, and I say isolate element, what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of everything except this window, which I don't know why in the particular case of this window I would want something like that. And isolate category would then just make it so that necessarily all of the windows are here. So I'll Control Z just to undo that. I'll click on a window again and I'll click isolate category, would just make it so that I could only see just the windows in my building. So maybe if there was just some scenario where I needed this particular instance, I could get there. Much more helpful when I'm looking at, like, let's say just walls and I want to just isolate it to only show me walls in the building or things like that. And then anytime I'm just done with this, I would click on reset just to make everything come back. An alternative to make the change a little bit more permanent would be to right click on something, and then you could do hide in view element or hide in view category. So again, element is just the one thing you're clicking on. Category would be all of the things that are associated with that same family or that same type. And this is particularly helpful. And again, it only is going to do it for this view. So it's just hiding it in this view. If I wanted to bring anything that I hid back, so for instance, if I right click on one of these spot elevations and I say hide in view category, and I just have them gone, but I want to bring them back for whatever reason, or I right click and I hide in view the roofs, the category of the roofs, just so I can kind of see inside the building when I orbit around and whatnot. Once I want to bring it back, what I'm going to do is click on this little light bulb here, and it's going to show me everything that is currently hidden in this pink color. To bring stuff back, I can either right click on it and say unhide in view, or I can click on it, and then up here we have the option to either unhide an element or unhide a category. So I can click on these roofs and say unhide the category. I can click on these levels or these spot elevations and I can say unhide category. And then just to get out of here, I would either click on the light bulb or just click on this X here, and that brings me back into just my regular view. So those are just a couple of ways that I can play around with some of the visuals within my drawing to make it a little bit easier to see everything that's going on or see different parts. One of the reasons why I like this section box, and I believe I've mentioned it before, but I'll say it again, is the fact that then I can just start cutting away parts of my building. So I was able to just drag the height one down, and so that way I can see into the second floor without necessarily having to hide the roof or things like that. Next, then, we'll look at adding in topography and how we can go about doing things like that. So I typically will do my topography in the site floor plan. So I'm just going to go into my floor plans and double click on site. And in here, there's a few things that I will often hide. So right away for the site plan, I'm just going to right click on these spot elevations, hide in view, or excuse me, these elevation markers, they're not spot elevations, hide in view category, which is just going to make them all go away. And then I'll also right click on the CAD files and hide them, hide in view element. So that way I'm only just looking at my building itself on the site. And then in order to create a site, I need to go into the tab up here called Massing and Site. So the first thing I'll do is just show how to make topography yourself manually. And then I'm not going to delete it, and I'm going to do a topography from an export. The website I'm going to use to do my export is this one here, cadmapper.com. You do need to make an account to use CADmapper, but it is free to make an account as a student, provided you use your Upstate EDU. I just forgot for a second what our email was. Okay, so to make a surface or to make a site, you're going to click on the Topo Surface tool, and this is going to bring us into a similar menu like our floor tool and our roof tool. And once we put a staircase in, our stair tool will do the same thing, where we have to draw some things in and then either hit the green check to say make this please, or hit the red X to say please stop. Right up here in this bar is where we're going to pick our elevation points. So are the various heights that we're going to put the topography within our house. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by just making an area that's sort of flattened out to be -6 inches. So I'm going to just highlight this elevation and I'll do -0 space 6. I don't have to type any units in because Revit is already going to think units of feet and inches. And I'll hit enter. And then I'm just going to start placing points. Once I place 3 points, it's going to try to triangulate a site, but I need to make sure I bring this site past my building as well. Then I'll have it start sloping gently up. So I'll make like -8, enter, and I'll place some points here. Then I'll do, or rather sloping gently down, -1 foot. I'll do -3 foot for my next couple points. If I wanted a steep slope right here, like from this point to this point, I would do like -8 feet. And if I make those really close to it, that's going to make a steeper slope. And if I go into my 3-dimensional view, we can see then that what's happening is, if I look at it straight from the front, it's at -6 inches here, but then it's approaching -8 feet down here. So we're just sloping onward and onward and onward. Let me go back into my site plan. And at this point, really, this is all I would necessarily need for a site for my fake building. If I wanted to, I could start pulling some of these points out to make this larger or smaller for a piece of land, which when we go over rendering, sometimes our land, we need to manipulate it a little bit to make our renderings not as disgusting looking. But I'm just going to come back into this modify menu and I'm going to hit the green check. Now, if I look at it 3-dimensionally, and I just drag my section box out a little bit because part of it was getting cut off, I have my site here. I usually, once I have my site made, I usually do like to just kind of bring this box in a little bit, to just make it a little bit smaller. And it's just slowly, gradually sloping downwards this way. But it's really hard to make like a realistic or a nice looking site when you are manually placing all of your points. So in the case of this one, if I wanted to try to start adding in things like a driveway, what I would do is I would click on subregion, and then I could start drawing in my own driveway here. This is a very large driveway. I just realized I was making it 104 feet wide. I'll just put like a little piece next to it. That's about, sure, we'll make it 12 foot. And it's okay that it goes past where my site ends. I'll say okay. And what this has done is it's made 2 surfaces. I have this surface here, and then I also have this surface here. When I look at it 3-dimensionally, all it's done is just made my house on a giant pile of dirt, and then it's also made this another pile of dirt. And I don't know about you, but I would at least want like grass instead of dirt on here. So to change our material here, it's very similar to the way we would change the material on like our walls and our roof, where I'm going to click on the topography, but instead of going into edit type, I'm just going to change the material right here. It's already in my properties bar. So I'm going to click on that. Then I'll click on the ellipses button that pops up, and I'm just going to search for grass. There is no grass in my project, but there is grass down here that I can load into the project. Grass is also one of the materials that I really dislike using the render appearance. So if I check that box off, I just dislike how dark that color is. So I usually don't check that off for grass. I usually click in this area and just make my own color, because this is going to have no effect on it other than how it appears in the consistent colors. And now I have green grass sitting around. And then I can also click on my little driveway here, and I can go into material, and I can change it to, I'll search for pavement, which there is no pavement in my drawing, but there are a few different options here. I'll use the dark gray one. I'll check off use render appearance. I often use that black one. But then this is just going to give it a little bit of a different material when I go to render. And this as well, it'll show things like grass. And especially when we bring it into software like Enscape, these blades of grass are even then going to have three-dimensional qualities to them, which is pretty cool. So this technically would here, I'll just make my section box a little larger this way. This would meet the site requirements of, okay, I've made a site. However, this is pretty dull and pretty boring, and I probably want to do something a little bit different. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to click on my site and just completely delete it. So now in my 3D view, I no longer have a site. And I'm going to show you how you can use websites like CAD Mapper to make a site based off of a specific area. So when you go on cadmapper.com, you of course have to sign in or create an account with them. I already have an account made, so that's why it just logged me in. And you can see here too that you can export this map to a couple of different software. So I'm just going to say that I want to export it to AutoCAD. I had recently done an export in this area of Boone already, which is why it just brought me back into this area to begin with. But you can also search for specific areas. So it'll take me to the Boone Greenway when I put in Boone. And then I want to kind of go a little bit towards, sorry, my cat just fell on my back. I want to put it more towards kind of like campus here. So here is campus. Here's some dining halls, or not dining halls, residence halls, I'm pretty sure. And I'm going to pick like one of the, somewhere around this area to be my house. So I'm going to pretend that this here is the house, the cardinal house that I'm creating. So I just zoomed in. Doesn't matter necessarily how much you zoom in. And then I'm going to say that I want to create a file. I want it to include the buildings as 3D data if available. And sure, you can even give me some height for it. I want it to do topography. The minimum is every 4 meters, which by the way, this also is going to do everything with meters. And then my road outlines, it's remembering some settings that I had from a previous export I did. So I believe by default, these are always just set to 8. But you can see here that I did a little bit of a just difference here within a previous export that I had done. So I'm going to just click on Create File. And this is going to make a little 3D model of my area here, as well as then some buildings in it. And I'm just going to click on Download. And it downloaded it as a zip folder, which we hopefully remember then we need to extract. So I'm going to click on Extract All, and I'll just have it put this folder in my downloads because I'm not too worried about it. So I'm just going to have it make a folder in downloads. And then what I'm going to do in Revit is it's totally fine to do this in the 3D mode. I do recommend though that you turn the section box off if you're going to do this in the 3D mode. Is I'm going to insert and import a CAD file. I'm going to go to my downloads folder. So for me, I've got to go up to my username, downloads, and then it would be this folder here. I'll go into here, and then I have my AutoCAD file. If it's not popping up when you go into this folder and it says it's empty, come down here and say for your file type that you want a DXF, and then it should come up. Now down here, all of this isn't going to be too important other than the import unit. Instead of it being auto detect, you're going to want to change it to meters. And then I'll say, okay, open up this file. And what it's done is it's brought in this topography here as a 3D model. However, it's definitely not in the right spot. So what I'm going to do in my 3D view is click on top, and then I'm going to click on this file here, unpin it. So I need to make sure I click on that pin, and then I'm just going to move or drag it so that this kind of house footprint is sort of in line with my house footprint. I could also rotate it too if I want, so I can spin it around a little bit so that this way, like, it's sitting kind of flat with my house. But again, like, my house is fictional, so I don't need to make this too perfect. So now it's sitting, at least footprint is sitting flush with my building. However, I have the problem of it's sitting way above my building. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to click on front, and I'm going to click on this, and I'm just going to use my arrow key just to kind of shuffle it down. I'm just going to eyeball it from a couple of different angles so that the site is sitting pretty well with the ground, which is going to be a little hard to do since we're on this steep, steep hill. Well, this can also be a way that I can show some grading too. I think maybe I'll move it. I'll go back into my left view and I'll move it up a little bit. I'm just trying to make this fake box that is the house, I'm just trying to make it a little bit aligned with where I have my floor. And so now I have my site in place. And what I'm going to do is go into massing and site, and I'm going to do a topo surface. But instead of placing points, I'm going to say create from an import, and I'll click on this CAD file. And I want to say I want you to ignore buildings and okay. And what it's done then is made topography based on this imported file. Sometimes too, I'll like to click on this simplify surface and say like have an accuracy of 1 foot, which will then help kind of make it a little bit easier with these marks as they go if I just have it a little bit more simplified. But in this case, it's a pretty just normal steep hill. And I can then say finish my surface. And what it's done is it's brought in this surface, and then I can right click on this import and say hide element for the time being, just so we can kind of see our building going on here. Now with this particular one, I now have 2 problems. One is that my porch here is just hanging out in the middle of nothing. I could solve this by then building out kind of a deck wall here and just putting some posts in to hold this up, but keep it with this slope. But the other problem is that my building is kind of inside the dirt or back here within this hill. So what I'm going to want to do is I could do 2 different things in this case. I could use the grading tool or the grading feature, or I could edit this surface. What I mean by editing the surface is if I go into my site floor plan and I click on the topography, I can go into edit surface and I can put in additional points here. And I can change what some of these points are. So if I wanted to move or place additional points around my building that have a -1 foot, I can place points around here. And if I look at it 3-dimensionally, what that is doing is it's just kind of moving the ground around my building and making points. So now that my building is no longer sitting in the dirt. And I can click OK, and then I have still my steep hill, but now my building is no longer in the dirt. The other thing I can do, so let me just Control Z a bunch to get this back, is I can use the graded region tool. Now what I want to do before that is click on my topography before I do any grading, and I want to change the phase. So I'm going to change the phase for the ground to be existing instead of new construction, which it is by default. And then I'm going to go into my site plan I'm going to temporarily hide my import. So I'm just going to click on my glasses and say hide element. And then I'm going to create a graded region. When I'm starting a graded region, I'm prompted with that the existing topo surface is demolished and a matching topo surface is created in the new phase. So if we want to create a new one like our existing one, or if we want to make a new one based on the perimeter, and I almost always click on this option. What I can do then with my graded region, and then I click on my topography, is I'll go into place point. And what I like about this, instead of using just manually manipulating it, is that it's then also changing it to have the existing topography lines versus the new topography lines within here. So it's doing a little bit of my line work for me when it comes to grading something. And then if I go into my 3D view and I click OK, I'm first going to have to hide my import, hide element. And then when it comes to my visuals for phasing, instead of having it show all, I'm just going to have it show me the complete, which is then going to show me the ground as the finished product as opposed to the new product. And what I might want to do too is go back into my site plan and I'm going to grade the region some more. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. And then I'm going to place some points just around this porch here that's going to be at -0.6 just to bring the ground up a little bit here. Just because I kind of dislike how it was floating. And that again will just kind of bring it up to be a little bit flatter here. So that's one way then that I can make a site that's a little bit more interesting and appealing, but without having to put a heck of a lot of effort into it. Now, to make my roads and driveways and things like that, I can also add those in using the subregion, but with an import, there's also some other things that I can do too that are pretty helpful. So I'm gonna, in my 3D view, I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna reset it so I get my little CAD import back in here. And what I'm gonna ask it to do in the Masking and Site tab is to create a subregion. And instead of drawing something in manually, I'm gonna use this pick line tool. I'm gonna hover over one of the edges of the roads and just hit tab and click. And what that has done is it's created a subregion just based on that road that already existed. And I'm going to change its material to be this pavement. And I'll do the same thing down here with this road as well. So I'm going to create a subregion, pick lines, hover over one of these roads and hit tab, which I was not on the road. There we go. Tab, click on it. We'll see what this warning does. It says it's slightly off axis. We're just going to see. Okay, it worked anyway, so I'm not worried. Material, asphalt. And then for my ground around it, my material, I'll make that grass. And so I'm able to, and I'll hide by 3D view here. I'm just going to do it this way by right clicking, hide in view element. Either way, whatever makes you happiest, go with that one. And then I can get a little bit more of an accurate look at my building and look at my site without having to put a whole lot of effort in from that importing. It takes a little bit of work and practice to get it going, but once you kind of get it in place, it's pretty simple to do. Last thing regarding sites then I want to talk on is adding in site components, which are things like our trees. So if I go into my site plan and I ask it to create site components, it's going to bring me into trees by default. If there is a tree here that I want, but is not located in here, what I'll do is click on load family, and then I can go into my English Imperial folder and I can go into planting. So in planting here, we have conifer based, we have deciduous based trees, and then we also have some shrubs, some other various trees, fall trees, tropical trees. So we can get a couple of different options in there. What's going to happen though with a site quite a bit is if I place this tree here, what it's going to do is put this tree at a height of 0, 0. So if I put that tree here and I go into my 3D view, oh, did they fix that? Because that'd be so awesome. It looks like they fixed that. So never mind. Usually it's going to put it just weirdly in the ground and then you'd have to change its height up. But it looks like if you're in the site plan, you can go to place components. And you can also spin them around if you want. And I can place these red ash trees, and then maybe I want like a smaller tree over here. I usually don't do trees too much in Revit because I kind of prefer how they look with the Enscape models instead. But I could place a bunch of trees around. And yeah, oh, that's so wonderful that they fixed that. This one's kind of awkwardly floating in midair here though. And so if I dislike how that looks, I can click on it, and from elevation, right now it has it 9 feet in the air. I can change it to 7 and see if I like that. That's still, to me, awkwardly floating. What about 3? There we go. At least now it's kind of in the ground. And I can start placing trees around in here. And then additionally, what I can do with some of these trees is in my visual style is I can turn shadows on. And then later on, when we go over solar studies, we can even change the time of day so we can see how these shadows from either the trees around our house or the other buildings around our house are going to be affecting it. So one way that we can attempt to see how shadows from other buildings are going to be playing with our house are through things called masses. So in the massing and site tab here, we also have this option to create in-place masses. So what that means is, and I'll do this, I guess, from the site plan, sure, is I can draw an in-place mass by clicking on that option. I have to give it a name, so I'll just call it like neighbors. And then I need to draw out a generic footprint for it. So if I had like a neighbor sitting over here, I'm just going to say like, okay, this is the neighbor's house. And then before I can make it into a mass, I need to turn it into a form. So I'm going to hit escape a couple of times, click on it, and say that I want to create a form. And then I can pull this form up or down. And I can also manipulate it by clicking on different edges or different faces. So if I just wanted to bring this edge over, I could. So this is how I can start making a little bit more complicated looking buildings and skyscrapers. But a lot of times when it comes to like a building of just here's like my neighbors, I usually just kind of leave them as these generic rectangles. And then once I'm all done, I'd click on Finish Mass. Sure, I'll save my project. Thanks for reminding me, Revit. And that way I can have kind of some buildings sitting around in here. Additionally, we can turn masses that we have into walls and into roofs. So I can use my wall tool here to say I want to make a wall by face. Click on this face and it turned it into a wall for me. So now this is a brick wall since that was the last thing I used, or rather a CMU wall since that was the last thing I used. Let me just undo a bunch, because what I can also do is I can create masses from my import. So if I click on my reveal hidden elements and I bring my import back, I can use the massing tool to create a mass based off of lines that already exist. So since I already know that I have a neighbor here, I can click on that face and I can say create a form. Excuse me, I can hover over an edge if it'll let me. Nope. Hit tab, click on those lines and say create a form, and it'll build a form up of that building. And I'll say okay. And then if I wanted the building that's over here, I can, usually I have to kind of orbit around to the bottom. In this case, it might also be where I want to just like hide the topography elements for a moment. So I'll click on here and I'll just say hide this element because it's just sort of in the way. Massing in site, make a mass, neighbor 2. I know I spelt that very wrong. Click on a line. I'll hit tab so I can get the whole edge. And I'll say create a solid form. And I can change the height of this too. And then I'll do just one more of these just to kind of show you how it works. In place mass, I'll just leave this one called mass 2. I'll say that I want to pick lines, hovered over one, hit tab so I could get the whole chain, and then I'll create it into a solid form. And I'll finish my massing. And then at this point, I'd be ready to, or once I had all of my masses made, I'd be ready to delete that, import, and then I can reset to bring my ground back. So masses, though, are not actual buildings. They're just kind of fleshed out forms that we can try to figure things out with. That can be kind of useful and helpful. So at this point, I'm going to save my work. And I'm going to actually close out of this file and just start a new one so I can show you some ways that we can play around with masses for just weird or interesting buildings. So I'm going to start a new model here. I'll leave it set as the construction template just because I'm not going to actually make anything with it. So this has brought me into just a completely blank CAD file, and I'll bring myself into the 3D view. And then I'm going to go into massing in site, and I'm just going to say that I want to make an in-place mass here. So it's just warning me that it's going to be visible when I have it open, and that's okay. And then I'm going to look at this just straight from the top. There we go. I zoomed way out. And I'm just going to make like a rectangle of something that's, 50 feet by around 36 feet, sure. So that's just kind of my generic footprint. And then I'll say that I want to create it into a form. So I'm going to click on this face and I'll say create into a form, and I can pull it up sort of however high I want it to. If I wanted to make a tower out of this that kind of has a bunch of little twists to it, I can click on the top face and I can rotate it, click somewhere to start, click to where to finish, and it's taken this object and it's twisted it around here. Then I can say that I want to finish it as a mass, And if I want to start applying it as walls, I can come into architecture and I can say that I want to do a wall by face, and it created, I'll put myself into consistent colors so you can see it a bit more. It created that twisted curved wall that I otherwise would not be able to make just using something like the traditional wall tool. If you want to know a little bit more about how to use some of these mask features, there's some great videos and I have them linked in my Revit playlist on YouTube. Particularly there's a video by the Revit kid that goes over it. And then there's also a few videos by the Balkan architect that go over how to play around with masses. But masses are just one of the ways where you can do some things that are a little bit different and a little bit from the norm in architecture, but still draw it out within Revit. So at this point though, we have our site and our building and everything ready to go. In our next demo, I believe we are going to be adding in components. So components will be things including our columns, all of our kitchen stuff, all of our appliances, as well as our staircase. We will finally add a staircase. So I'll see you guys then.